Yes. Go ahead, Harshan.
I can't, okay. Yes, so basically I'll be talking about this paper that is a review of soft active matter. And I'll basically be describing, the general setting, etc., of soft active matter physics and how it connects to the themes that we are sort of interested in. So that is what I'll be talking about. So the general outline of my talk is first I'll give a brief introduction, then examples where soft matter, uh, is seen in basically different context, experimental context. Then I'll describe, like basic models of flocking, and then I'll describe active particles and basically dynamical equations and some of their phenomenology, etc. So soft matter is basically a domain which is consideration are not rigid solids, but they are not traditional fluids also. So, the kind of, systems are, let's say, liquid crystals are at the boundary of what are solids and what are basically traditional fluids. So, active matter stands for basically that there are a bunch of particles, maybe through catalytic reactions that are happening on the surface, and that is why they are called active matter. So there is influx of free energy, and this makes the situation non-equilibrium and driven. So the examples are basically things like mixtures of cells, biofilaments, so actin filaments in cells, motor proteins, etc. So the sort of suspension of them, those are studied in in experimental soft matter, how they behave, etc. And then obviously the cytoskeleton of living cells. So living cells themselves are soft matter systems, and there is basically many active sort of particles floating in the cytoplasm, and that is how we can look at the media of living cells, and we can look at it as soft matter. So non-living active matter is basically you have these theoretical and experimental systems like granular rods and colloidal systems or nanoscale particles propelled through a fluid by, as I said, catalytic activity. And collection of robots are also can also be considered as soft matter. So the hope of this field is that the myriad sort of context in which soft matter is seen can be basically described by the same framework, since a lot of phases that are the phenomenology of phases of these soft matter systems are seen to be similar across various contexts. So there is a hope that there is a sort of physics framework here which seeks to unify the behavior seen in these various contexts. So the basic sort of model that is ultimately that started it all was this model of flocking called the Toner tube model. So basically you have some sort of let's say a bird which is flying in a flock, or there is shoals of fish that are basically in the ocean. And the point is that one of these sort of quote unquote particles sees the other surrounding particles and changes its direction of motion according to that. So basically it polls the neighbors around it to see which direction they're going in, and basically it changes its direction accordingly. So these are basically these this very elementary sort of model basically described flocking phenomena and fish shoals and collection. So, fish shoals, bird flocks, and collection of keratocytes, which are basically cells in the body. So, the hope was that there would be some sort of a unifying viewpoint for all these sort of systems that seem to flock in similar sort of ways. And, this basically was, the sort of experimental systems that were formalized first were liquid crystals. So the hope was that you could use similar sort of models to describe other phenomena as well. So, the question is, there is some general broken symmetry viewpoint. So, so rather than asking what the particulars of the individual systems are, the hope was that you'll have some sort of generic broken symmetry viewpoint for dealing with these sort of generalized flocks, etc. So, the very geometry of active particles. So, when you have an anisotropic particle which sort of tends to align with each other, then it automatically breaks isotropy because, it basically chooses a direction. And, so there are two ways to actually formalize this. One is that you describe, some sort of polar order where so basically, the setup taken in this paper is that there is some sort of active particles which are sort of rod like, and they are floating in some fluid which is the setup for, let's say, bacteria in some sort of bacteria in some sort of bacterial culture, etc. So that is the setup that is basically taken. And you have some sort of there are two ways in which you can come up with an order parameter. One is some sort of polar order is broken, and you have this order parameter which is the direction of the particle. And the other sort of way that this direction can be imposed is by having a tensor, which is having a tensor order parameter. So some symmetric traceless tensor with an eigenvector which is in the direction of the broken symmetry, and basically we can have that. So, those are the two sort of ways in which you can include direction in your formalism. So this is the sort of setup that is there. So these are, polar active particles. And so polar active particles have a distinct head and tail, and apolar active particles, don't have this head and tail symmetry. So for polar active particles, the sort of relevant order parameter is P. And for basically apolar active particles, the relevant order parameter is Q. So, that is because, while there is a preferred direction, the very polarity of that direction doesn't matter. So it can either be in this orientation or that orientation, but there is a breaking of, the symmetry of directions. But the orientation itself is a symmetry that is not broken. So in that case, you use Q as the order parameter for dealing with these systems. So now, there is a classification of dynamics. There is the nematic polar sort of distinction, which decides what sort of order parameter you take, and what type of sort of quantity you use to basically model this breaking of symmetry. And the other sort of distinction is, like there are models with momentum conservation and models without momentum conservation. So the thing is, as I said, that the setting is all these active particles that are sitting in some background fluid. So, if the regime of dynamics is such that the fluid acts in a dissipative manner, so it basically, the very function of that fluid is to be dissipative and sort of, dissipate momentum of these active particles. Or, there is a regime of dynamics where the active particle is, actively exchanging momentum with the fluid. In that particular case, the systems are labeled as wet. So in that particular case, the equations you write down will couple the fluid to the active particles, to the distribution of the active particles, and you'll have an active exchange of momentum, which will be taken into account. So they couple to the media there, basically. So, this coupling is what is ultimately, what we need to sort of choose and basically say whether, so are we in a regime of dynamics where that coupling matters, or are we in a regime of dynamics where that coupling doesn't matter? So, these are the sort of dynamics you write down. Basically there is the density, and you have, this is the standard way of writing the dynamics. And this is, basically an order parameter and, a term in the equations, also because, so this is the sort of equations written for flocking systems. So this is the direction of momentum, and this is the density. And, these are the sort of, extensions of the continuity equation, basically. So you have some del T rho plus V naught. So V naught is the speed of the flockers. So you're assuming that every bird has a uniform speed. Every bird or fish or bacterial sort of participant has a uniform sort of speed. So it is good to write it this way, and you have some sort of free energy function. But so basically, this is the sort of non-equilibrium dynamics you write for when you have an equilibrium, when you have deviations from an equilibrium system that is described by a Hamilton, by a free energy F. So, this is the sort of standard dynamics you write down. The only difference being this inclusion of P. So, this is an order parameter as well as, the moment, a term in the equations. So the free energy is a functional of both rho and P. So, you have these equations. This is the advection term. So, this is basically saying that the equation 2A is saying that, there are basically sources and sinks in some sense. So while the total number of particles is conserved, because that is the conserved quantity here. So while the total number of particles is conserved, the density, the local density of the flock can change, and basically change in more than just changing through the particles moving in and out of the position that they are in. So there is a free energy that sort of actively changes the density. The other is basically this momentum conservation equation that is modified to have this free energy also. So basically there is an influx of momentum in the system, and basically that is what this captures. So basically, the F terms are basically noise terms. So this is basically the diffusive noise that the system has. So this is how you write the equations. And
so the first equation is just the continuity equations with some sort
yes,
of sinks.
yes.
The second
Yes,
one is the conservation of momentum, again with some
yes,
sort
yes,
of things. But
yes.
I think the whole question here is, the main question is, what is F, right? So how do you model F? Because the model
Yeah,
of
so
F of the free energy will determine the
yes.
shape of the two equations. So do they
So
have
there are two.
some models that
Yes, yes.
people use for, I don't know, bird flocking or for?
So basically, there are two answers to your questions. One is that the sort of models can be decided by looking at the phenomenology in experiment. So you can look at the various phases of the flock and then sort of model it and say, okay, this is the sort of F that works. The other way, as I said, is this broken symmetry viewpoint, which wants to sort of use the Landau theory in Landau's way of writing free energy to this whole sort of domain.
Well, and
So
those ways also phenomenological way. So in both cases, you write it phenomenological way. But
yes,
are you saying that to write F, you should use some kind of symmetry considerations of what the
yes,
symmetry was before
yes,
it was broken, and what was after it was broken. Okay, so then do they
yes,
discuss in the paper some kind of particular models of F, which
yes, yes.
with a broken symmetry? Okay.
Yes. So basically, if you have these uh, polar active particles, then the order parameter is P itself, the sort of momentum, because there is a vector that the polar active particles select. So it's not just a direction, but a vector. So the sort of so if that is the case, then the sort of F that you write is something like this. So you have some phenomenological considerations, and you use the motivation from Landau's theory to write some sort of a free energy which looks like this. So there is a term that is proportional to P square. There's a term that is proportional to P to the 4. Then obviously there are terms in which that penalize inhomogeneities in the distribution of P's, and there is a term for this density perturbations, etc. So this is the most general sort of F that you can write given the symmetry considerations. So
Well, you
for
can
each of
write.
these,
We can write high and higher order terms. I mean, this is just the
yes,
lowest terms in the expansion.
yes. So
You
so
can keep
basically,
going.
so for more subtle sort of phase behaviors, you can even write higher order terms. So they say that for explaining a lot of things, you require other sort of terms other than this sort of captures. But for the most basic sort of broken symmetry viewpoint, the sort of terms that come out of this broken symmetry viewpoint, these are the minimal sort of terms that you can write.
Well,
So
I'm really more worried about that you are not including some lower order terms with some other fields. So you are saying here P is everything there is, but maybe there is some
yes,
other quantity which, birds take into account, maybe vector, maybe tensor, and to make their decisions. And then there would be other hidden parameter that you would have, hidden variable, hidden field that you would have to write in order to preserve the symmetry and still stay within the lower order in the expansion. So
Okay. So
looking for those other fields, I mean, maybe the way to model, because not everything that you don't observe directly gluons and still we write it in our action of the standard model.
yes.
Okay.
So I mean, that's right. So basically, the thing is, I think the real validation of this free energy functional is really going back to experiments and seeing the sort of flocks that they have. So this is able to capture most of the phase transitions that are seen in bird flocks. So that is why
I see.
they basically say that it's a valid sort of
Sure.
free energy. So this is the sort of equation that you get from momentum, and basically you can compare the statistics, and they cite a lot of papers in which this comparison is done. So they say, okay, this sort of works at least at the level that they sort of desire. So now for nematics, so for liquid crystals that are there, which the order parameter changes because you have this sort of apolar active particle that is the component of the nematics. So rather than write a vector, rather than have this p, you have to basically write q instead of p, because that is the order parameter that sort of captures the broken symmetry, because
Hold
the
on.
orientation.
You said that q was a tensor, but you wanted q to be a direction. Yes, that's what you're saying. Unoriented direction. That's what you want q to be, right?
No, yes. So basically, that tensor captures the unoriented direction.
Okay, one of the components.
Yeah, one of the eigenvectors is that. So
eigenvectors.
that's how they.
Okay.
Yes. So that is how they sort of say that this is the relevant sort of variable instead of p. So then they describe the dynamics of q, and then again they write the free energy for q. So here these semicolons are basically contractions. So you have some sort of qij, qji, which is there. So again, this is the sort of free energy that they write from the sort of way that Landau writes free energy. So this is how they sort of write the free energies. And again, they say that it captures a lot of phenomena that is there. So for nematics also, so it can capture phase transitions that basically are undergone by nematic systems. So the very realization. So there are many systems in which they are realized. So for instance, there are cells which don't have this head tail symmetry. So for dealing with them, q is a better variable than p. And there are other sort of cells that have this head tail asymmetry. So for them, p is better. So they do that analysis, and they say that again they cite a lot of papers in which they say that this has been done, and this is what works. So now, basically, this was for dry active matter. So for, wet active matter, they basically have this sort of, conservation. So basically what you have is a bunch of active particles that is coupled to a fluid. And then you're basically trying to describe, in some sense, the dynamics of these active particles. So, basically, in addition to writing the conservation equations, you have some sort of entropy production, which is there, which is due to the ATP consumption that the biological cells have. So basically, these are the sort of entropy production terms you can write and augment to other equations that and basically have the collective dynamics. So basically, this is basically the scope of the paper. And now, basically, I wanted to talk about connections with the smart matter viewpoint. So basically, these systems that are biological, are products of evolution. So basically, there would be some sort of ways in which the mechanical response functions, let's say compressibility, etc., are finely tuned, and hence, they are a smart sort of form of matter which are there and which can be explored. And basically, there's a rich phenomenology of solutions, and basically, the thing is that you have this sort of novel mechanical response functions that are there, which can be studied, and biological systems might display a lot of smart mechanical phenomena that is yet unexplored. So thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Harshan. So I guess my question is, have people been applying this formalism to study neuromorphic materials, study the materials that are capable of learning or doing like this? I think this is, this is the right way to approach those active matter phenomenologically, but then there is still one step missing, from phenomenological description and to saying that this matter is learning something, is you have to make this step. So have people looked at the
So I looked at it and I could not find much of, basically there was a lot of work on glassy transitions, but
okay.
That is of the whole flock itself. But
Okay.
not materials like nitinol. I think
Sure.
that is what you mean by smart matter systems.
Well,
Basically.
any matter. It has to be biological or physical. Okay, and then the second question is again going back to what I said previously. So I understand
Yes.
how you can incorporate P into your phenomenological Landau-like model. I understand how you can incorporate Q in your phenomenological.
Yes.
But are there any models where you have hidden fields, like the ones that you don't observe, but yet you have to model them using all the symmetry and constructing and writing down the free energy, yet you then integrate them out and for the predictions, for the comparing to the model. So have they been using any hidden fields, extra fields, or internal fields, whatever you want to call it?
No. No. So
Here,
all
like
the fields
what
are
you're
very
saying that
explicit.
we observe P, so let's model it in terms of P. We observe Q, so let's model in terms of Q. But of course,
Yes.
then all of those organisms, they're much more complex, and there's a lot of things that the information they process and then have that may not just be observable through direct observations directly, but may be
Yes.
observable indirectly, and then you would want to incorporate that into your description. If you want to have a more complete description. Okay, so you haven't
Yes,
seen.
I understand.
Okay.
So I haven't seen that approach, but they point out papers where a more mechanistic sort of approach is done, where you sort of build these interactions up and then justify the free energies that are written here.
Sure. Okay. And well, maybe the last one, since we talked about symmetry, like, what about gauge symmetries, right? So I mean, have they incorporated anything like that, or
No, they haven't.
local
But
symmetries, anything?
yeah, no local symmetry. So they haven't done that. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
There are other questions, comments? Well, hopefully your next talk will be about all of that.
Yes, okay. I hope so too.
Okay.
Yes,
Thanks,
sure.
Harshan. Thanks,
Okay, thank you,
everyone.
everyone. Thank you.
Thanks for
Thank you.
bye-bye. Thanks.